Yeah, I went to film school out of college. I went to USC and got an MFA, and got out of film school, having learned how to write screenplays, but nobody would hire me to do it. So I was working as a PA and a production designer and stuff like that. And sort of out of the blue, it's more complicated than this, but sort of out of the blue, Joe Ruby called up. He'd read a script of Ruby Spears and asked if I wanted to come in and work on development. And I didn't know what development was, but I knew it was indoors, and they paid a whole lot better than slopping around on sets, so I was there. And it worked out really nicely. We worked on shows, what was it, like The Puppy and Mr. T, and I'd never written animation before. I'd never really thought about writing animation. I was just kind of writing big action films. But back in those days, before special effects, you were either doing a $100 million live action film, or you were doing a animated cartoon for doing this kind of material. So that was just great. And stayed at Ruby Spears for like a year and a half, and then went to Lucasfilm. Had a disastrous experience on Droids, which was one of their Star Wars shows. It was Droids and Ewoks, and I was kind of there for a few months, and then came out, had nothing to do, and Steve Gerber called me up and said, "Hey, you want to work on G.I. Joe?" Because I'd worked with Steve at Ruby Spears, and said, "Yeah, sure, that'd be great." And I was sort of like ghost. I mean, Sunmo knew about it and everything, but I was sort of ghost story editing episodes for a while, and there got to know Jay Bacall, who was our creative director. And so they finally asked, "Hey, you want to come on staff as an associate producer?" And I said, "Yeah, this is the way, this is really a lot of fun." And I started out on G.I. Joe and did a lot of G.I. Joes, and then was sort of redeployed to Transformers probably about 6 months later. My charter when they moved me over from G.I. Joe to Transformers was really I think they wanted to make the show a little bit older. They wanted to change the direction of it a little bit. This was really sort of motivated by Sunbo and by really more than anybody. It's certainly not by the marketplace, because the show was doing very well, just fine without me. Went over there and kind of on re-watching the episodes, I discovered, our mission was to sort of make it a little bit older and a little bit edgier. And we went in there and pretty much did that. And I stayed on, I sort of surfed between Transformers and G.I. Joe. I'd say for the next year, but was mostly on Transformers. And then, did a lot of rewrites of the movie, finally, and then actually wrote and, for the third season, did a lot of writing. When we came in on the show, we had to work within the mythology that had been created for the show, and for me, that's the kind of thing I love to do. I basically, at the same time, I was designing role-playing games. I was working with a guy named Gary Gygax, who created Dungeons and Dragons, and we were, doing D&D projects and interactive novels and stuff like that. And so I think I really love the mythological aspects of Transformers, and I think that, that tends to show up later on, and in good ways and in bad ways, quite frankly, But, Jay Bacall at one point and I did a draft of the Transformer movie that we just thought was the most brilliant thing in the world. Nobody else shared our enthusiasm, but we thought it was really brilliant. And it was all about the mythology, and it was about the secret of Cybertron, and bits and pieces of it made it back into the real Transformer movie. But we really worked hard to figure out the mythology. I mean, we decided that Cybertron itself was a giant robot, and so on. But so I like the mythological aspects of it, and I like the relationship between the characters and the origin story and where they were going and all that. Hasbro, you couldn't ask for a better client. A guy named Bob Prupus was running Boys Toys at that point, and Bob was just he was really just kind of the perfect guy. I mean, I invited him to my wedding, 10 years later. It was so much fun to work with. Hasbro's attitude really was they wanted to see their toys presented in the most fun and best possible way they could, and it was our job to make up cool stories, and they really were incredibly unobtrusive, and I probably will never experience the creative freedom again that we had there. It was, I mean, there were rules, and this is a children's TV show, and there are rules to what you can and can't do, and those rules existed then. But as long as we didn't have a lot of disembowelings and stuff like that, Hasbro didn't really much care what we did. That was until we killed Optimus Prime, but that's a different story. Transformers and G.I. Joe were unabashedly what were called toy shows. It was a phenomenon of the mid-'80s, and there were no bones made about that. That we were, our job was to present the toys and exciting, play patterns and adventures for the viewers. And to that end, Hasbro, in the early days, they would give us a list of characters they wanted to use in each episode. That didn't mean we couldn't use other characters too, it just meant we had to feature, each of those characters had to have a hero moment. And later on, it seems to me that kind of dropped off, but we would hear a character was discontinued, so we'd substitute another character in a particular story. Sometimes that would happen later on. It was an interesting creative exercise. But yeah, it was unabashedly. We all knew what the rules were. That we're doing the agenda is we're selling toys, and this is a half-hour commercial. I don't think people would have phrased it that way, and nobody ever put it to me that way. But I mean, that's the way we thought of it. But that having been said, there was an amazing amount of creative freedom. There was no network giving you notes. There was no broadcast standards and practices giving us notes. Frankly, Hasbro was really pretty invisible to the process. Just given our agenda and what our job was, they were just great. They were kind of around. They'd send us free toys and send us cool drawings and tell us we were doing a real good job, and basically left us our own devices. Prime Target, yeah, which is included in the set, was really, if not the only, one of the few shows that I actually wrote that season. I wrote it with Buzz Dixon. And it's simultaneously kind of a familiar and a bizarre story. I was kind of fascinated by the idea, because I didn't think we made enough of the fact that the Transformers are all disguised as cars and things like that. And I was trying to fascinated by all the different devices you could build in a city to trap cars. And I sort of wanted to get that in, and the episode more or less built itself off of trying to get that stuff in. And then we came up with just the idea that there'd be a big game hunter hunting for Optimus Prime. He'd hunted for airplanes, and he'd hunted for tanks, and he'd hunted for helicopters, and now he was going to get the head Autobot. And that's really where the episode came from. Buzz, I think, added a lot of the fun to it, making him this kind of Old English type big game hunter, and adding the goofy sidekick to him and all that, which ended up, I think, being fun. But that was a real impulse. And what was funny with both Transformers in that era and G.I. Joe simultaneously was I tended to write weird episodes because I edited so many normal ones that I was always trying to write an episode that went and did something that other episodes didn't do. I remember Jay Bacall calling one time and saying, "Hey, I'd like to see a Joe episode where they don't blow up the Cobra headquarters at the end." So that's we did two like that. I wrote a Prime Target with Buzz Dixon, and actually the truth is my relation with Buzz goes back literally to the first day in my first day in the animation business. And that was when Joe Ruby hired me. And I went into his office, and he introduced me to Buzz, and he said, "Hi, this is Buzz. I want you two guys to work on a concept." And so we went out to the local coffee shop, and Joe told us what he wanted us to do. And we created a thing called Cyberforce. There's later a product called Cyberforce that had nothing to do with this. But we thought it was just the most brilliant thing in the world, and really pitched Joe hard, and he just didn't like the idea. And the next day he said, "Now you have to understand, it's like you come up with an idea, but you're not supposed to fall in love with it. You just come up with a bunch of different takes." It was actually great advice. Ever since then, I've kind of learned to, if the idea is kind of vague, you come up with the different takes. But anyway, back to Buzz. Yeah, Buzz and I worked together at Ruby Spears, and then we worked together, on Transformers. We did this episode, and Buzz did a lot of stuff on G.I. Joe. And as recently as this year, we worked together on the Terminator video game. I mean, it's kind of a long relationship, and we've always kind of written well together. My recollection of the transformance of Transformers is it started out season 1. It seemed to me most of the time was very Earth-based, and it was a slightly younger show. There was a lot of interaction between human characters. There was a kid, Spike, who was involved with the Transformers a lot. And about the time I came on, I think that Sunbow felt that they had kind of run that well dry, and they wanted to expand the show to create different kinds of stories, make it a little more science fiction-y. I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think GoButts had come out somewhere around that period, and they were chiseling away at the younger market, and I think that was part of the impetus to move Transformers to an older show. I'm just guessing on that. I don't really remember. I don't think anybody told me that. I think that was my sense. And you know, Joe and Tom, Joe Bacall and Tom Griffin, I think really wanted it to have a little bit more of an edge to it. And the guys who'd been story editing, Bryce and Dick, had done a really good job. And it's one of those things in retrospect, I realize how good a job. Because what they did is they really established the series. They really, you know, got it going. And we look at it now, and it's, you know, it seems like a pretty obvious series to do. But at the time, nobody had ever really done a series with 130 main characters in it before, and so it's quite a challenge. By the time season 2 came along, and by the time when I was brought on, we sort of tried to just transition it. And earlier it was in subtle ways. The dialogue got a little bit harder. The fights became a little more visceral, I would imagine. The plots became a little more complex. There were certain things that had become kind of stock things in the show that we got rid of. We didn't want to use a lot of holograms, though I did notice I used a hologram in Prime Target. And we wanted to make it a little bit older. At the end of season 2, we knew we were getting ready for the movie. And so a lot of things became biased, became informed by what we were going to do in the movie. And what we knew in the movie was we were going to do things like, you know, kill Optimus Prime and wipe out the entire 85 toy line and stuff like that. And so we wanted to sort of move the series in a way that wouldn't be just totally out of the blue, that the movie would seem like part of the flesh of the series. And then by season 3, a number of weird things had happened by season 3. The Transformers themselves had become a lot more abstract. If you look at the characters in the movie, you know, where the first season and early Transformers were clearly, this is a Ferrari, you know, this is an airplane, this is, you know, this is, most specifically, this is an F-16, and the whole gag with Transformers was that they looked like a toy, and it was very cool and secret that it turned into a robot. By season 3, they were into triple changers and Dinobots, and, you know, the triple changer, we referred to them as, so this is a, that turns into a what? You know, and, you know, it became much more science fiction-y, and kind of with it was the series. And you know, in some ways, you know, at both levels, both the toy and the show, we might have gone too far by the third season. We lost the simple charm of Transformers being these things that live on Earth, and they're living here secretly, and they're disguised as cars, and, you know, your family's car might well transform into something else. We ditched that altogether, and a lot more of the stories went in deep into the Transformer mythology, and really broke away from that. And I think we very rarely went back to Earth, and when we did, we did it at a whole different level. And there's a plus and a minus to it. At one level, the series is progressing and changing, and you don't end up with 270 episodes that all feel the same way. At a number, you know, when you get more sophisticated, more science fiction, you're trading away some of the more charming, basic aspects to it. And I guess the good news is that now all of those things exist for whatever the viewers like. The bad news is you almost have to watch them on a seasonal basis. I think we ended up being a lot more about continuity as the series went on. I think we were doing something that now almost every TV show does now, which is it's a self-contained episode, but there's kind of an arc that goes over the course of the season. And I think we were very concerned about that, doing that later on, whereas I don't think that was, the first season was very much a reset show. By the end of the first show, the Decepticons are in their secret headquarters, the Autobots are in their secret headquarters, and the next episode starts with a blank slate, and we kind of broke away from that somewhere around the middle of the second season. A lot of people have asked why you think, because I mean, it's something you ask yourself whenever Transformers was a phenomenon, and Carol Monroe at Hasbro told me it was the highest selling toy line of all time, and I didn't, and obviously if we knew what made a super successful phenomenon, we'd be doing that every week. I think that the Transformers was a lot of stuff. It was, first of all, it was a really unique idea. I remember the first time I went to Japantown, and bought one of these, just a little car that turned into a robot, and I was kind of fascinated by it, and I was in my 20s at that point. I wasn't even a kid. There's something fascinating about it. I mean, the toy itself's pretty brilliant because it's a vehicle. Excuse me. It's a vehicle, it's a character, and it's a construction toy all at the same time, and that's a huge combination. That's to have 3 different play patterns in one toy is great, and it's kind of a puzzle. On top of that, I think the show did, just because it was so different than anything anybody was seeing at that point. Nobody'd really seen a lot of anime style stuff, not in the in mainstream or Japanese influenced shows at that point. Nobody'd really seen a lot of action shows. The one thing the toy shows brought in the mid-'80s was a lot of action and adventure, because before that, for many years, children's television and in fact animation, with feature animation, was dead, and network animation was really politically correct. I mean, the networks in that point basically wrote the book for political correctness. And and every form that takes, there were anti-violence, they were, and violence in both forms, not just imitatable action, which is you don't want to, have a character put a cape over his head and jump off a roof, but they were just philosophically against violence. And I think that Transformers and Joe came along, and they had a whole different attitude and octane, and that was appealing. In order to do this interview, I watched a few of the episodes. It was fun. They were really kind of fun to watch, and it would be impossible for me to separate my own personal emotions and kind of memories of that period of my life, which is a period I remember very fondly, from the actual content that I was watching. I have no idea whether the shows were any good or not. Though, as I was watching with a certain amount of distance and objectivity, there's a kind of sort of just fun and joy to them, which reflects the kind of the mood when we were doing it. And that's not to say that there weren't horrible fights and arguments and people going 16 rounds over whether Starscream should say a certain line or not. But it was just, we had an office in Westwood, and we had, a lot of fun people working in the office, and it was just a good period. So, I mean, there's that side of me, and then there's the side of me objectively watching it. One thing it has, that's different from when, later on I went on, and wrote a lot of movies and doing a lot of video games now, and I'm back writing movies kind of. But one thing that was really great about working on series television, especially the kind of shows we were doing then, where we get you get an order for 130 episodes for a year, is you could try a lot of different things. It was the ultimate film school. We'd just get an idea, and you'd go write it as a script, and we knew the characters and we knew the world, and we'd write it, and we were bound by certain rules. All the acts had to be basically 7+ minutes long, and so we had to have a strong 3-act structure, and we had templates and all that for structure. But you got to try a lot of experiments. You got to break a lot of rules. Sometimes by design, sometimes out of necessity. Sometimes we'd wouldn't get the proper footage back. You'd be like missing a couple minutes, so we'd sort of have to invent a couple minutes of the episode or stuff like that. So, but the point is that you know, never before, and maybe never again, has there been this opportunity to have 130, you know, shots at doing something, and sort of taking your characters, you know, literally out for a drive 130 times and having them do different things. And you know, some episodes you get them back, you know, ooh, you know. But oddly enough, those aren't necessarily the episodes that fans don't like. And some episodes you get back and you'd be really proud of and think, this is really cool. Let's do more of that. And so it was a great, you know, environment to work in.